In a small town in Michigan, a young boy named Ethan Ross struggled through his school days. Ethan was a quiet, shy boy with deep brown eyes and curly black hair. On the outside, he seemed like any other kid in the classroom. But inside, he was plagued with self-doubt and frustration. His test scores were always low, and despite his efforts, he never seemed to do well on any of his assignments. Every time the teacher handed out test papers, Ethan felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He already knew what his grades would be, single digits, a 0 if he was lucky. His classmates snickered behind his back, some of them laughing openly when they saw his results. Ethan was used to being the butt of the joke, the kid everyone thought would never amount to anything. One day, after yet another failed test, Ethan slumped in his chair, staring at the big red 0 on his paper. Beside him, a girl in the front row whispered to her friend, "Did you see? Ethan got another 0. Their teacher, Miss Graham, walked by and misheard the comment. "0? No, I think that's a 9, she exclaimed. The entire class erupted into laughter. Miss Graham's mistake was like a cruel joke that confirmed to everyone that even a 9 was an improvement for Ethan. Humiliated, Ethan shoved the paper into his backpack. When the bell rang, he rushed out of the classroom, hoping to avoid the mocking stares of his classmates. But the laughter followed him through the hallways, echoing in his mind. Outside, a group of older boys caught up with him. "Hey, genius," one of them called. "How's that 0 feeling today?" Ethan kept his head down, trying to ignore them, but the words stung. Every day, it was the same. The bullying, the teasing, the relentless taunts. Sometimes it felt like they were just waiting for him to fall apart. One afternoon, as the insults piled on, something inside Ethan snapped. A boy named Alex, one of the leaders of the group, pushed him hard against a locker. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed a padlock from his bag and swung it at Alex's face. Blood spurted from the boy's nose and he fell to the ground, crying out in pain. The hallway went silent. Later that day, Ethan sat in the principal's office, his hands trembling. His mother, Sarah, was called in and the principal showed her Ethan's report card. It was filled with failing grades in almost every subject. Sarah's heart sank, but she refused to let despair take over. She knew her son was struggling, but deep down she believed he was capable of much more than anyone could see. The principal's voice was stern. "Mrs. Ross, we need to address Ethan's behavior and his academic performance. If this continues, I'm afraid there will be serious consequences." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't bear to see her son like this, caught in a spiral of failure and frustration. At home, Ethan sat on the couch, staring at the floor. "I'm dumb, Mom. I'm never going to be good at anything," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "You are not dumb, Ethan. You're smart, and you can do anything you set your mind to. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Ethan looked into his mother's eyes, but he couldn't bring himself to believe her words. The constant failures had drained him of any hope. Sarah had always been a pillar of strength for Ethan and his older brother, Jason. Life hadn't been easy for her. She had grown up poor, never finishing high school, and had married young. Her husband, Ethan's father, had left years ago, leaving her to raise the boys on her own. She worked 2 jobs as a cleaner, scrubbing floors and washing windows to keep a roof over their heads. But no matter how tough life got, Sarah always found a way to keep her boys motivated. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table, trying to study for a spelling test, he squinted at the words on the page. "Mom, I can't read this, the letters are all blurry," he said, rubbing his eyes. Sarah frowned. "Blurry? Let me see," she said, leaning over to look at the book. She took Ethan to the eye doctor the next day, and sure enough, the doctor diagnosed him with poor eyesight. After getting his first pair of glasses, Ethan put them on and blinked in surprise. The world was suddenly clearer. He could see everything in sharp focus, and for the first time, the words in his books were crisp and legible. With his new glasses, Ethan's grades began to improve. His teachers noticed the change, and so did his classmates. Slowly but surely, he was catching up. The laughter and teasing didn't stop completely, but it started to matter less. Around this time, Ethan's life took another unexpected turn. One Sunday morning, Sarah took him and Jason to church. The minister's sermon that day was about a doctor who had overcome great odds to succeed. As Ethan listened to the minister's words, something clicked in his mind. He could see himself in that story. He could imagine becoming a doctor, someone who helped people and made a difference in the world. After the service, Ethan tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, I want to be a doctor." Sarah smiled at him. "You can be anything you want, Ethan, but you'll have to work hard for it." Inspired by his newfound dream of becoming a doctor, Ethan threw himself into his studies. His grades continued to improve, but Sarah was still worried. She knew that her sons were spending too much time watching television and not enough time reading or learning. One evening, she turned off the TV and looked at her boys. "That's enough TV for today. From now on, you're both going to the library every week. You'll read 2 books, and you'll write a report on each one. And you're only allowed to watch 2 TV shows a week after you finish your homework." Ethan and Jason groaned in protest, but Sarah wasn't backing down. She took them to the library the very next day, and they both checked out books. Ethan picked out a science book about rocks and minerals, intrigued by the idea of learning more about the natural world. As the weeks went by, Ethan's reading skills improved dramatically. His love for learning grew, and he started to enjoy the challenge of mastering new subjects. At school, his teachers began to notice how much he had changed. One day during a science lesson, Ethan's teacher held up a shiny black rock. "Does anyone know what this is?" she asked. The class fell silent. No one seemed to have an answer, except for Ethan. He raised his hand tentatively. "It's obsidian," he said, his voice steady. "It's formed when lava cools quickly." The teacher looked at him in surprise. "That's right, Ethan. Very good." Ethan's classmates stared at him in disbelief. He'd gone from being the kid who couldn't pass a test to the student who knew the answer to questions even the smartest kids didn't know. After class, the teacher pulled Ethan aside. "You've really unlocked something special, Ethan. Keep it up." For the first time, Ethan felt like he was on the right path. But even as he excelled in school, there were still challenges to face. His teachers, though impressed by his progress, couldn't fully see past his skin color and the poverty he came from. At the annual awards ceremony, when Ethan was named the best student, his teacher made a comment that stung deeply. "The rest of you should be ashamed," she said to the students. "Here's a boy from a poor, single-parent home, and he's outscoring all of you." Her words were meant to be congratulatory, but they were laced with a racial undertone that undermined Ethan's hard-earned success. As Ethan entered high school, he continued to excel academically, but socially, he struggled. His family didn't have the money for the latest clothes, and Ethan often felt out of place among his peers. He was especially self-conscious about his clothes when he saw his friend Marcus, who always dressed in the latest fashions, wearing fancy sneakers and stylish jackets. One day, Ethan asked his mother for money to buy new clothes. "Mom, everyone at school is making fun of me because of what I wear. I need new stuff." Sarah sighed. "Ethan, we don't have much money. I'll see what I can do. But you need to understand that it's not about the clothes you wear. It's about who you are." Ethan didn't want to hear that. He wanted to fit in. A few days later, Sarah scraped together enough money to buy him a new pair of pants, but they weren't what Ethan had hoped for. They were plain and simple, not the fashionable clothes his friends were wearing. Frustrated, Ethan lashed out at his mother. "These are horrible. Why can't I have nice clothes like Marcus?" Sarah's face tightened with anger. "You don't need fancy clothes to be smart or successful. Those people with all the fashion, they're empty inside." In a fit of rage, Ethan grabbed a hammer that his mother had been using to fix a window and charged toward her. But before he could do anything, Jason stepped in and stopped him. The incident left Ethan shaken, and he realized that his anger had gotten the best of him. As the months went on, Ethan began to fall in with the wrong crowd. Marcus introduced him to some older boys who were involved in dangerous activities. One afternoon, Marcus showed Ethan a knife he had just bought. "Check this out," Marcus said, flipping the blade open. Ethan was uneasy, but didn't want to seem scared. As the boys hung out, tensions flared, and during an argument, Marcus insulted Ethan. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed the knife and stabbed at Marcus. But the blade was already broken, and no real harm was done. Panicking, Ethan fled the scene. As he ran, the gravity of what he had done hit him. This could have ended in disaster, and for what? To impress a group of boys who didn't care about him? That night, Ethan made a decision. He needed to leave those friends behind. He couldn't afford to let his anger or bad influences derail the future he wanted. Despite the struggles and setbacks, Ethan's hard work in school paid off. He earned a scholarship to Yale University, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. When he arrived on campus, it was a whole new world, one that felt intimidating and overwhelming. At Yale, Ethan met a girl named Camille, who quickly became his girlfriend. But even with her support, Ethan found himself struggling to adjust. The lectures were difficult, and the competitive atmosphere was exhausting. Chemistry in particular was a subject that caused him endless frustration. "I'm not cut out for this," Ethan confided in Camille one evening. "I'm only good at reading, but these lectures, I don't get them." Camille smiled at him. "You don't have to get everything from the lectures. You're a great reader, Ethan. Study on your own. You've got this." Her words of encouragement pushed Ethan to dig deeper. He spent countless nights studying chemistry, sometimes so intensely that he started to hallucinate, seeing the professor writing formulas on the board in his mind. When the chemistry exam finally came, Ethan aced it. He'd pushed past his doubts and succeeded. The experience solidified his desire to pursue medicine, specifically neurosurgery. After graduation, Ethan applied to several medical schools but set his sights on one in particular, Johns Hopkins, the most renowned institution for neurosurgery in the country. Competition was fierce, with only 2 residency spots available. Despite the odds, Ethan was determined. During his interview, the doctor asked him why he wanted to become a neurosurgeon. "The brain is the most mysterious organ in the body," Ethan said. "I want to be the one to unlock its secrets. I believe in miracles, and I want to make them happen." Impressed by his confidence and passion, the interviewer accepted him into the program. Ethan couldn't believe it. He was one step closer to his dream. As a resident at Johns Hopkins, Ethan quickly gained a reputation for his skill and dedication. One day, an emergency case came in. A patient needed immediate brain surgery, but there were no senior doctors available to perform the operation. Ethan, still a resident and not yet fully licensed, had to make a choice. The patient's life was in his hands. With no other options, Ethan decided to perform the surgery. It was a risky move, one that could have cost him his career if anything went wrong. But the surgery was a success, and the patient survived. Later, Ethan was called into his supervisor's office. He feared he would be reprimanded for operating without permission, but to his surprise, the senior doctor praised him. "You did the right thing, Ross," the doctor said. "You saved a life." One of Ethan's most memorable cases involved a young girl suffering from severe seizures. Her condition was so bad that she was constantly having seizures, and the other doctors believed there was little hope for her recovery. But Ethan saw something different. He suggested a radical surgery called a hemispherectomy, which involved removing a portion of the brain that was causing the seizures. The procedure was risky. It could leave the child paralyzed or unable to speak, but it was her only chance. The night before the surgery, Ethan knelt by his bed and prayed. The next morning, he performed the operation with the utmost care. When it was over, the room was tense. The anesthesiologist tried to wake the child, but there was no response. Ethan's heart pounded as the seconds ticked by. Finally, the girl stirred. She opened her eyes, and in a small, weak voice, she called out, "Mom? Dad?" The room erupted in joy. Ethan had performed a miracle. Ethan's career soared after that success, but his personal life took a hit. His wife, Camille, had been pregnant with their first child, but they tragically lost the baby in childbirth. The loss devastated them both. Ethan wanted to take time off to be with Camille, but she urged him to return to work. "There are other lives you can save," she told him softly. Ethan threw himself back into his work, but the pain of the loss lingered. Then came the most difficult case of his career. Ethan was invited to Germany to consult on a pair of conjoined twins, Maria and Sophia, whose heads were fused together. The surgery to separate them was one of the most complex procedures in medical history, and Ethan wasn't sure it could be done. But after hours of research and preparation, Ethan agreed to take the case. He assembled a team of 50 doctors, nurses, and specialists. Together, they rehearsed every step of the operation, knowing that even the smallest mistake could have catastrophic consequences. On the day of the surgery, the operating room was filled with tension. The team had only 1 hour to separate the twins' brains before the risk of brain damage became too high. Ethan's hands were steady as he worked, his mind focused on the task at hand. After 22 hours of surgery, the twins were successfully separated. Ethan met with their parents, who were overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. It was the pinnacle of his career, a testament to his skill and perseverance. Ethan Ross had come a long way from the boy who couldn't pass a spelling test. Through determination, hard work, and the unwavering support of his mother, he had transformed his life, proving that no matter where you start, it's where you finish that matters.